ended up getting involved in activism when Ron Paul was running for president in 2007. And Ron Paul was talking about the money system and the Federal Reserve and how we may have to do everything we want to change our government, but if we don't get to the potential, the root of the problem is the money system. If we don't address that, we don't address the true root of power on the planet, our government may not do the trick. So I really went down the rabbit hole of, oh my gosh, who are these people running our planet and all these things? And it was a lot of fear and anger phase I went through. And so I ended up organizing this march for Ron Paul. 10,000 people showed up in DC. And it was a fabulous day where Ron Paul spoke and Naomi Wolf spoke, and we all felt like we won something. And so I won the activist game. And I realized that activism was not going to be the answer. There wasn't going to be probably a political solution. So what's going on? How do we change the systems of our planet to be in a more sustainable place where, of course, my passion then was just my own personal empowerment. Right? Because I was feeling empowered. It was from a libertarian element, but ultimately it evolved. And so I did some transformational work. I got involved in intentional community. In my property in New Mexico, I had several iterations of intentional community that had beautiful moments of us coming together and growing in the garden and eating from the garden and eating the eggs from the chickens and all the beautiful things and harmonious moments for a week. And there would be that things would fall apart. So during doing some transformational work, really getting to the root of my responsibility for everything that's happening in my reality and everything I'm bringing into my reality, and realizing the depth of human evolutionary growth that's going to happen in order to really bring people together in a new way, right? So all of these things, the computer talent, the understanding of the transformational work, the recognition of some of the systems that are on our planet kind of restricting the potential we have, all brought to this moment when Ethereum came around, and I first started checking that out in 2016. I thought, man, this is it, right? Most people are familiar with Ethereum here, yes? Understand generally. Anybody not, just out of curiosity? Not a single one. That's great. All right. So Ethereum came, and I said, this is the thing. This is what we can do. This is how we can build systems that are sovereign, that are protected, and cannot be shut down, and cannot be controlled. And I started launching my first Ethereum contract. And of course, it took me about a month to download the Ethereum blockchain to get an actual node running on my and then launching my first contract. I just wasn't too impressed with the technology. I knew this was not the future of tech. This was not the way it was going to be. And I found Holochain and started talking with Art Brock, one of the founders. He invited me to San Francisco to just explore more about Holochain and see how I could support, and ended up getting invited to join the core development team just after the time when they had formulated their plan to be able to fund their operation. Because Holochain is an open source project, they're giving it away for the world. So they had to find a way to support themselves while they made this offering to the world. And so how they determined to do that was through this company called Holo. And so they launched an ICO, and I went over to Europe to help them do that, and was blessed to have been there for that moment in time to create this and be part of that. And so that, I came out of there being able to tell the story that essentially when I gave myself completely, because I had spent 10 years prior to this, completely, what I realized then was a subconscious vow of poverty. I had the wealth, I had explored all that, and then I gave up all my power in every way for about 10 years of my life until I found Holochain. I walked in there and I'm in this state of mind, and I'm just ready to contribute to this project because I knew the world needed it. And through the ICO, I was blessed with abundance again. And I just get to tell that story, and I really want everybody to be able to tell the story. When you give from your heart, you give what you're passionate about, you do what you're called to do in the world, that you're rewarded with abundance, and you're blessed with everything, all your needs being met. And so that's kind of the underlying tone of everything that I'm going to share with you. We're going to start with some technical stuff about Holochain, and we're going to move through into some social systems, right? How we can literally, the Junto team here, I believe these guys are the Facebook killers. So I'm going to introduce them in a minute, okay? That's a big statement, but I feel that in my heart. So we're going to move into how we create social networks in this new environment. And then we're going to move into CoGov, which is my particular offering to the Holochain ecosystem that is about how we form into groups, create coherence, and make magic happen in the world to transform this entire planet. So that's my story. With no further ado, I'd like to introduce Eric who is the founder of Junto. Yes? Thank you, Ray, and thank you, all of you, for being here. I mean, how many people here have social media, right? And how many people here used to have social media but got off social media because you don't want to use social media anymore? All right, so we have a handful of people, and most importantly, how many people here understand to a certain degree the problems that we're experiencing with social media today? So this is a well-educated audience. We have, like for us, for me, identifying not only the addictive qualities, the privacy concerns, the mental health repercussions produced by existing platforms, and fundamentally the business models that simply aren't sustainable. We saw an opportunity to create a new medium to kind of really inspire authenticity, enable more effective social coordination, and inspire collaboration on a global scale where we can really produce the change that we want to see. And so, as Ray mentioned, he's going to kind of go into Holochain. After we're going to take a 20-minute break, and then we're going to dive deeper into Junto and kind of our philosophy, the design of the platform, how things work. And we also have two other presenters as well. Josh and Yaz are going to speak. Josh is our lead Holochain developer, and he's done a wonderful job just kind of picking up things on the fly as Holochain has been progressing very swiftly. And so he's going to speak to that, and Yaz is going to speak to the community building aspect side of things. And so without further ado, just hand this off to Ray. Okay, I'm going to start off with a little introduction video to Holochain. It's about 7 minutes long, but I really think it gives a flavor of the passion and the power of this project. And some of you may have seen it before, but it's a good one.
We have used the World Wide Web, the internet, to work together in really interesting ways.
The internet itself is this magnificent thing that promises this world where we can connect to each other and communicate across distances and share knowledge and be more alive together.
The problem is all of these technologies rely on a centralized model where there is a corporation or an entity in the center that holds ownership of the data and does the coordination.
We have this new strange phrase of these things are too big to fail. We have to prop them back up because our economy would fall apart, our society would fall apart without them. It's not actually true. It's just that that pattern can't continue, which is a good thing. That's good news, because that pattern isn't sustainable anyway. That pattern is burning the planet right now.
One of the things that I think most of us have is this feeling of being a cog in a wheel, of being a part in a pyramid, where we are there as a function, not as a human, and it's a really stuck feeling. And natural systems don't only operate in those hierarchies. They have rich networks of information flow that allow for a really complex and varied array of interactions.
We need to build some healthier patterns in being able to be stewards of the planet. The question is, do we have the intelligence on the collective level to be able to coordinate these things? And the tools that we have for coordination all encode the communications on carriers that are enclosable, carriers that can be intercepted, that can be constrained, that can be controlled.
Enclosable carriers always lead to concentrations of power. And so the primary thing we're trying to create with Holochain is an unenclosable carrier for doing communication interaction. And so what that means is decentralized.
Why do we want a decentralized internet? Because we want agency and autonomy and security. Those three things are really important, and we're losing those in the internet that we have today.
So we need a new pattern. And that new pattern, unfortunately, is not blockchain, which is also burning the planet and repeating all of the same things that they were claiming to fix.
There was this incredible excitement around blockchain as, oh wow, now we can do money in a way that we don't need the banks anymore. But if you actually look at what happened, it's deeply, deeply centralized, because you basically centralized all the power with the miners.
Its architecture actually isn't scalable, and it won't be able to grow to the size that we need to coordinate on large scale, and it won't be able to go fast enough. But the claims were good. The goals were good. What they wanted to do in that decentralization was good. And that's what we're doing in Holochain. Holochain, by being an unenclosable carrier that's completely peer-to-peer, that becomes the safety net that you can turn to when the things that are too big to fail but are irresistibly on a failure trajectory. Holochain is an alternative technology architecture for solving similar problems, but without the bottlenecks and without the massive computing overhead.
It is a new version of the internet that allows us to connect together in ways that escape the centralized structures. And then Holo makes a bridge to the mainstream audience so that everybody can participate in the new internet.
You can install Holo on an existing computer, or you can buy a Holo box pre-configured, plug and play, ready to go. Holo is our way of extending virtual Holochain space to people who aren't even running Holochain yet and just want to access these kinds of applications through their browser. And you get paid for providing the hosting services.
When you shift the architecture the way we're shifting it to a cooperative decentralized space, we get to a world in which the interactions that we're doing at this global scale through these things we call applications are human-centric as opposed to money-centric, which is, I think, what they really are right now.
One of the things that differentiates us from most of the projects in this space is our interest in living systems.
These principles are behind a lot of our design and a lot of our understanding of how nature works and how we then translate that into how scalable, decentralized computing patterns work. We're used to doing things on scale through command and control, and we haven't really had an opportunity to have those kinds of social patterns of smart networks emerge because they haven't had a way to truly be peered, to truly hold things together and make sure everybody's following the rules and have an immune system to kick out bad actors, malicious nodes, and detect corruption. Holochain does all that. It's modeled all on natural systems, the way our body does this with cells. And I think that's going to be a bigger game changer than we can imagine.
The system that we're in is collapsing, in multiple ways. And I think that we're building the thing that's going to be the bridge into the future, that's going to enable more people to have more of their needs met and be in community and belonging.
Having unenclosable carriers like Holochain for us to coordinate and organize will let us establish whole new patterns of sharing with each other, caring for each other, seeing what's needed, knowing how to respond to situations, knowing how to deal with things on scale. We've dedicated a lot of time to this.
The thinking through the deep structure of the world and what it means and where to go has been done over the last decade. And now we get to touch the ground and build something that people can use today that moves us into that world we want.
One of the great things about the project is that we, I think, have done a good job of attracting a lot of people because of the deeper purpose of the project, resonating with their purpose. And so we have a diverse team.
There is a larger community that's ready for this, that wants to build with us. We're engaging more and more developers around the world, and so there's a deep hope and faith that this will genuinely be for everyone.
It feels like our purpose in the world is we have the capacity to bring this into reality, and that's what we're doing. And it's become time to invite much wider participation.
Man, I love that video. Those guys, so the three of them, three main are, I consider them dear friends, and it's just so moving every time I see it, and I get to reconnect with them and the spirit of that team. So I just want to let you guys know that I totally want this to be an interactive experience. So if you have questions, feel free to just jump in. Okay, so let's start off with the unenclosable carrier. Does everybody kind of get what that is? Okay. All right, cool. So an example of an unenclosable carrier is air. So if I take this mic away and I talk to you right now, my vocal cords are vibrating, going through the air, and it's vibrating your eardrum, right? That's an unenclosable carrier. There's nothing anybody can really do to stop that, right? If I was the people on Zoom, however, here, there's lots of things that could go wrong. It's where my message cannot be communicated, it could be intercepted, it could be stopped, it could be, retranslated with all the deep fake technology going on. Who knows what people can do, right? So this pure ability for humans to interact directly and to have confidence that that interaction is pure is super important. And so that's what they set out to do, was become an unenclosable carrier for essentially metacurrency transactions. Metacurrency is where Holochain was born out of, actually. Metacurrency is about a 15-year-old project. I'll try to get this back in presentation mode here. They started talking about what the possibilities were. So they imagined a world where, let's assume that we had some benevolent dictators running the planet. And they really wanted the best for everybody. They wanted everybody to thrive and reach their highest potential, have access to everything they needed. Those dictators would not have the information they need to do that. They just couldn't, even if they wanted to. And so the idea was, what's one of the main reasons that they can't do that is that the only metrics we have that we're tracking about the needs and exchanges that are happening in the world are done through money and bank accounts and economics. So there's lots of brilliant number crunchers tracking all of these facts and figures and doing calculations and economic projections and making giving information to the big federal governments and the UN and the Federal Reserve and the central banks and making all these economic predictions, but it's only a small fraction of the actual exchanges that are happening in the world. The actual value exchange that people are happening is far bigger than money itself. And so the idea of metacurrency is, what if we tried to have metrics about those other kinds of exchanges that were happening? Who's tracking the value given when the mothers are raising the children or the fathers? Who's tracking the value of a hug, for instance? There's all kinds of things that we value in our experience that we have no way of sensing the needs for and providing any kind of way to deliver those needs on a global scale. And so metacurrency proposed the idea that if we started being able to track those other metrics, to bring transparency to what's already actually happening anyway, right? So tracking isn't a good word. I say it sometimes. It's about bringing transparency to the interactions that are already happening. If we could create a way for people to identify value and start bringing transparency to the flow of those exchanges in an ecosystem, we can start to scale up and make intelligent decisions about how to meet needs. And so in order to do that, they realized that if we start doing this and people really start catching on, the powers that be are going to want to resist this. This is going to change everything. And that's where the need for the unenclosable carrier came from. So this is about metrics, not money. Money is one form of metrics about certain levels of exchange, but there are far more exchanges happening. And this would be easy if I wasn't holding a mic. There we go. Okay, shift. Cool. All right, so we'll get into a little bit of the tech specs of Holochain, but not too much. And if anybody wants to go deeper, feel free to reach out anytime. Holochain is the best of blockchain, which is monotonic hash chains. So, and combined with the best of BitTorrent. Okay, so the idea of blockchain is that you have this ledger that's a global ledger and nobody can change it, right? And I'll explain a little bit why they can't change it, but everybody has a copy of it. So nobody can fake it or modify it in a way and take advantage of the system, right? Nobody can go back and just change a record in there to their advantage. And so that's been widely accepted as a really great step forward in technology, obviously. There's been a lot of buzz about blockchain. What that requires is this global ledger. And so it requires all these nodes all around the planet to have the same copy of the same data. And the means by which they verify that that data is accurate and verify that nobody can game the system, called Nakamoto consensus. And this is the thing that actually is called mining. So you've heard of mining probably. Mining right now is taking about 0.4% of the electricity usage of the entire planet, just for Bitcoin mining alone. And so there's a bunch of other blockchain minings and all kinds of, and that's just the beginning. If Bitcoin would continue to grow, that would grow as well. So that's unsustainable, and Art referred to that as burning the planet, and it's clear that that's not the path. So they took this other idea that's been out there for 20 years, working nonstop. It's BitTorrent, or peer-to-peer file share. Everybody familiar with that? The thing you can go on to get movies and books and software anytime, any place, and for decades now, they haven't been able to shut that down. So something tells you there's something special about that technology, because we know for a fact that if they could stop people from sharing movies online, they certainly would. So that's an example. That technology is part of what makes up the unenclosable character. So they combine these two technologies. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the tech specs here with called the monotonic hash chain. This is what makes blockchain work. So this looks like columns and rows, like data, right? This is how we all have, most of us work in spreadsheets and have some concept of data. What a hash is it takes a chunk of that data, it runs it through an algorithm, and it comes up with some crazy code, right, that represents uniquely this set of data. You change any element of this data, this hash will completely change. So it is possible, of course, for two sets of data to come to compute to the same hash, but the chances of that are so infinitely impossible that it's not a real issue that we have to deal with. So that's what a hash is, okay? So you can take this whole data and you can know that somebody's talking about the same bunch of data by a short code, by just a little bit of data, okay? Does that make sense? Okay. So a hash chain now, we take a chunk of data, and we hash it, and then when the next chunk of data comes along that we want to add to our chain, right? More and more rows or more data needs to get added to our system. That's usually the way the world works. So we combine the hash from the previous chunk with this, okay? And then that continues along. So the next chunk of data that comes along has the hash of this, which is the hash of this chunk, which also contains the hash of this chunk, right? So if anything would get modified anywhere in the past of any of this data, the whole thing would become invalidated. These hashes would not code the same way anymore. So that's how it can all be validated. That's blockchain technology. So in blockchain technology, this is the way data looks. With Holochain, data looks more like this. So I'm moving pretty quick here. Nice. I'll try to slow down. But Holochain is not just a distributed ledger technology. It is actually an application development ecosystem. So that's something that also sets it completely apart from most of the other blockchain technologies out there. Ethereum touched on this a bit. Probably most of us have heard of smart contracts. So smart contracts are a way that you can take a cryptocurrency system that is fundamentally a cryptocurrency, Ethereum is, and you can do these computational actions upon it. They're called smart contracts, and smart contracts are more really like dumb apps because they don't do everything we expect applications to do in the world. But they do have a use, and what Holochain is actually an application development ecosystem, which you can build any kind of app. For instance, you could build a Facebook replacement, but an Uber replacement, an Airbnb replacement, a Twitter replacement. All of these things are in the works. They're all being discussed. People who are understanding where Holochain is headed understand the need to jump on the bandwagon now. Once you drink the Holochain Kool-Aid, there's no going back. It's just the way it is. It really does fundamentally change your understanding of technology, of software development, and where we're all headed. And so people are jumping on board and realizing the potential here. I predict in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see all the major applications we use have their peer-to-peer replacements built on Holochain on our phone and in our everyday use. And yeah, and if it's not Holochain, it's going to be something just like it. So it is this full application development ecosystem where anything you can imagine you can build, and you can build it in such a way that there are no central servers needed. Right now, that is kind of the problem with Facebook, right? You can make a post, but somebody at the central server, the central office, said they don't like your post, and that the world doesn't need to know about that. just go ahead and press that delete button. And of course they have access to all the data, and we don't. So in a lot of cases, they know more about you than you know about yourself. That's pretty scary to me. So in terms of Holochain being an application development ecosystem, there's another little video. This is a little bit technical, but they try to keep it, pretty base, and I hope it makes sense, and maybe it'll generate some questions. We have a bunch of time to talk about Holochain and get into some questions if you guys have any.
Hi, my name is Nicolas Luck. I'm one of the Holochain core developers, and in this video I would like to give you a quick and concise 5-minute download of what Holochain is and how it actually works. Holochain is a framework for building fully distributed peer-to-peer applications. You could think of it as like a Ruby on Rails, but instead of spitting out something that runs on a centralized server, it creates a fully distributed peer-to-peer network customized for your application. Important to mention here, Holochain is not blockchain. Holochain takes an agent-centric approach, while blockchain is data-centric. With blockchain, every node of a network maintains the same state of the network, the one objective global truth, the consensus that actually is protected by a lot of work, and that makes it possible to think of the system as like one global database or one global computer. But that is actually also the reason why blockchain has scaling issues. If every Bitcoin node on this planet has to validate and synchronize everybody else's transactions, well, that is why there is a transaction per second limit in every blockchain. Nobody would ask how many HTTP transactions the internet is able to handle each second, because there is no one bottleneck. But the limitation that comes out of this basic approach of blockchain has already primed the perception of what distributed applications and architectures are able to deliver. Holochain is not doing that. Holochain does not force consensus over the whole network. Instead, following this agent-centric approach, each agent is maintaining his/her own history. So there still in Holochain is a chain, a hash chain like the blockchain, but each agent has its own tamper-proof hash chain. So everything an agent is saying or doing, so if it is a social network, it would be posts, or it could be transactions of a cryptocurrency, every action that an agent is undertaking is being stored in its hash chain. So Holochain is actually pushing this chain aspect from the center of the network to the edges. This is very similar to Git, for instance, but with one very important addition, and that is signatures. Everything that an agent authors is being signed by the agent's private key. So an agent's source chain plus the private key is actually what in Holochain represents an agent. This could be already sufficient for several applications, like for instance a Git on Holochain or an identity management application, in which entries are only being stored via node-to-node communication, and the main concept needed here is the tamper-proofness of the hash chain of each agent. But for most applications, we need something else. And that is why Holochain also implements a DHT, a distributed hash table, as the public space. The same thing that is being used in BitTorrent or IPFS, for instance. The problem with only using source chains would be that if a node goes offline, then all the contents are not accessible by other nodes. But if we, for instance, want to implement a social network on Holochain where published posts are being accessible by everybody else, then we need other nodes to also store entries otherwise only stored in the author source chain. And in order to make sure that these entries are always accessible, Holochain maintains a certain number of redundant copies for each entry, where this number is a parameter that can be set for each application. This enables the author to go offline while still somebody reading the post could get the entries from the DHT. Now, the third thing next to the source chain and the DHT that is being combined here in order to enable high trust applications like cryptocurrencies is a distributed validation of content. Let us look at an example here. So say we would have an agent that is trying to hack the system and maybe post in the name of another user, or that is trying to make a currency transaction that is not valid. And suppose this agent has hacked its own software that is running locally in order to create these malicious entries, would be now trying to share these entries in the public space via the DHT. Every node in the DHT that is receiving an entry to store first runs the validation rules of that application. We actually call the code that makes up an application DNA. And the core of that are the validation rules. They are called DNA because that is what every node of an application needs to share. So you could say actually that there is consensus also in a Holochain app, but it is consensus about the validation rules. The attacker now obviously is running different validation rules locally, which made it possible for him to create this malicious entry. So in a sense, by changing those validation rules, this attacker forked into a different app. Now the validating DHT node applying those validation rules will find out that this entry is not valid. Now, being agent-centric and having a strong representation of agency means in this case here that this malicious entry actually holds the signature of the attacker. And that is a fact that now can be leveraged in something we call immune system. So now the DHT node that encountered this invalid entry is going to gossip with its peers and sharing its findings, which are actually cryptographically signed proof for the misbehavior of the attacker. Each of these nodes is now able to apply their copy of the validation rules and confirm that this entry really is not valid. Depending on the membrane and immune system settings of this app, this could lead to having the whole system stop communicating with the malicious actor. But we believe there is no one-size-fits-all solution that should be applied for all apps. So for instance, for our Twitter clone Clutter, there's no need to take such drastic measures if somebody tries to tweet a tweet that is longer than 140 characters or 280. The abstract concept of this management of members of a network is something we call membranes. Since we are agent-centric, we can do much more sophisticated stuff than just being permissionless or permissioned. Membranes could be non-existent, or defining a closed group, or could ask for a certain reputation in a different app, or have a certain number of people vouch for you to enter, or actually could resemble something like proof of work or proof of stake. For Holo, we introduced proof of service, which is kind of like proof of work, but the work is not a hash crack, but actually showing a history of having served other people's app under this agency. And again, Holochain is a framework for distributed apps. So everything that comes out of Holochain is an app. So with every DNA that represents a certain app, a new network is being created. It is like having your own blockchain for each smart contract. And now each agent can be part of many networks and talk to different other agents through these networks. A more fitting metaphor for a Holochain application would be a language. By installing an app, by installing the validation rules, the DNA, your agent learns to speak this language to other agents which also speak this language. Bridging between apps always happens through an agent that is able to speak both languages. I've said earlier that Holochain is not blockchain. But with Holochain, you could actually build an app that is a blockchain. I actually intend to build a Bitcoin clone on Holochain that is using Nakamoto consensus and proof of work. So in a sense, Holochain is meta with regards to blockchain. Or to put it differently, blockchain is just one of maybe a host of different distributed design patterns that become possible with Holochain. I'm sorry I passed the 5 minutes. If you want to dive deeper, I have some links here for you. Please check out my Medium article in which I'm talking about agent-centric applications and an idea of how the Holochain ecosystem could evolve. You can find the Holochain white paper at holochain.org, developer documentation if you want to start building your own app at developer.holochain.org. Please also check out holo.host, which is our flagship app distributed cloud hosting on Holo, including an agent-centric cryptocurrency. And you can reach me in our Telegram channel as well as in our team chat under my nickname Luxus.
There we go. All right. Cool. So I know he's got a funny accent and he went back. I think and Nico's a dear friend too. We were over at his place in Germany and this guy, I mean, from the brilliant technical mind he has such a big heart and a connection with people. And that's what I love about this team continually. Like every one of them is really, because it's not a lot of people. Like most of the heart-centered people I find are more interested in serving people on the ground in direct ways and working in that kind of industry. They don't think about scalable global system solutions. And the people that do think about that stuff are very often disconnected a lot of times. And what I've just found over and over with this team is that they're very balanced in that way. So their technical mind is there and their big heart is always there. Realizing the importance of what they're doing. But one of the biggest things he hit on there that I didn't really talk about yet was the fact that each Holochain app is its own Holochain. Okay, so it's its own structures of hash chains, distributed hash chains across multiple nodes. So I can write an app. Junto, somebody can start running Junto. And if I'm the only user of Junto in the world, then that's okay because there's nobody to talk to anyway. But as soon as somebody else starts running Junto, those nodes will start gossiping with each other and start sharing the information that's public. And as a third person comes on, and a fourth, and a fifth, and 100, and 1,000, they all start gossiping and all start sharing the information. But the actual app itself is running off of my own device. So when you actually go, if you're going to a Holochain application via a URL, you'll go to localhost or 127.0.0.1. It means you're talking to your own device. And your own device is serving you the interface for that application. And then all the magic is just happening underneath through the protocols of Holochain. So that's, let's see what else I got.
And Telegram.
Great. We're on to Junto next, and we're going to take a break. So, any questions? That all makes sense? Yeah.
Yeah. Can you build a privacy blockchain on top of Holochain? You know, with like a Zcash feature?
Yeah. As Nico was alluding to, you could actually build Bitcoin on Holochain if you wanted, and or Zcash or pretty much anything. Yes. And there are, I can't think of the name of it offhand. I don't know if you remember, but there's another privacy networking layer that Holochain is partnered with to create, if you do want to create from Ether, yes, thank you. So that's coming. That's critical. Most of these, most of the things I'm going to be talking about and sharing, I'm a fan of the transparency. I think that the world we're transitioning into, transparency is going to be critical to the shift, and the resistance that we're going to find is definitely legitimate. I mean, there's a lot of things we need to worry about in this day and age, and the way things work now in terms of people having access to information about what we're doing and the apps we're running and things. But ultimately, I think the transparency will win the day, and that as we learn to build trust and build wholesome relationships and build software and digital systems that reflect those wholesome relationships, I think we're going to gain a lot of trust. And in the meantime, yes, there are absolutely solutions to run very private applications on Holochain.
Yeah. What are the major risks? What are the major risks?
Risks to scaling.
What are your main concerns?
Well, me personally, the scaling issues are not even present really, because as nodes join the network, you have more computing power on the network. So it scales itself up naturally. And being that there is no one global ledger, right? Every app is its own ledger. And so we don't have to worry about, for instance, like there's somebody selling digital cats on Ethereum. You guys know about this? And they were just auctioning these cats and they were selling them and reselling them for more and more. And it was literally slowing down the whole Ethereum network. So like legitimate business transactions that just needed to send $10,000 across the world with Ethereum were being slowed down because people were buying and selling cats with this app. That's not something you have to worry about in Holochain because the apps run on their own Holochain. Does that answer your question?
So I've been wondering.
Adoption. Okay. All right. Yes. I think my sense is that, like I said, kind of once you understand the depth and the importance of the sovereignty that's created through the peer-to-peer and through agent-centric design, it kind of puts you in a special club or, a special like residence, a special understanding. And it seems like the people that are getting that understanding are finding each other all over the planet very rapidly. And I think we're going to see a lot of people that are doing that thriving. And I think that's going to be the attractor. The people who are tapping into this understanding of how our relationships and our digital relationships can be reformed are going to be happy people. And that's what we're seeing so far. So that's my faith. Yeah.
So in addition to that, like as we've transitioned into this Web 3.0 from centralization to decentralization, we haven't necessarily seen any sort of application operate at scale, right? And I think that the reason for this is because the popular designs of decentralized technology have been blockchain, and the proof of work, proof of stake, global consensus mechanisms that kind of run this ecosystem currently have a lot of scalability bottlenecks. And so our hope with Junto, at least, is since social media is something that everybody uses, like many people use, and this is something that can reach a wide adoption of people. And our hope and our goal is to by being the first distributed application to operate at scale that resonates with many people, we can kind of drive this adoption for Holochain as well. And so that's kind of that mutual symbiosis that we see with both of these projects.
Hello guys, I'm Yaz. I work on the Junto team, but I'm not technical at all. So I don't know anything about coding really. But this whole, oh yeah, hey, hi, hello. But I think that there's ways that we explain Holochain to people, non-technical people, that really resonate, and they can really understand why like this idea of a new internet is relevant at all. So I foresee that we'll be able to communicate these technical ideas in ways that are more relevant to people who aren't technical. And it'll be cool to see those worlds kind of collide. And as Ray was saying, we're finding each other, all these different people. So yeah.
Over here, we have another person who'd like to speak about adoption.
So just to give you some context, my name is Stephen Morris. I'm a friend of some of the team also. I know Arthur personally from many years ago, and I've been following Holochain for about a year and a half now or so, right before the ICO. And adoption is an interesting question. I've seen this a lot. I'm on Twitter giving a lot of feedback to people. And one question I wonder is, why do you care about adoption? Just something to consider. Like what? Like Holochain is actually a technology that if only Junto ran on it. Like the adoption mindset to me is people needing adoption in order for it to be financially viable. That's the normal place the question is coming from. And Holochain is open source and free. So anybody can use it if they want to, and if they don't need to, you got something better, fine. And that's one of the things about the team that's really impressive is they got something they believe is really good, but they're not pushing for adoption. They're just putting out something that works. And obviously Junto and Hum and the other organizations are finding that it can do things that blockchain can't. And if I get the apps I need running what I want, I don't care whether it's on Holochain or blockchain or whatever. So adoption is the way you're talking about it, and most people talk about it, isn't even really a consideration in that way. So I just invite you to think about what's the motivation behind that, any of your questions, because this really is a different way to think about the world. And the deeper you can go with that, and the more you can look at the videos that aren't about the technology, but about the community, that'll make the difference.
Yeah, I think you hit a really important point though. So one of the concerns about adoption is, will this company be able to make it? Like, are enough users going to come on board for them to be financially viable? This is an open source project. Holochain is, once the beta version is stable and out in the world, nothing anybody can do to stop it. It's there for everybody to use. Junto will always be able to use it from now to the end of time, whether that team falls apart the next day or not. And as an open source project, there will always be developers that will have some interest. And of course, if there is more adoption, then there will be more interest. But either way, we have that stability. We don't have this financial corporation or anything that has to make money in order for Holochain to survive.
Yep. Go ahead.
Why do you know you can adjust the blockchain and then the technology?
Okay, yeah.
Perhaps in the globe.
Sure. So there is, it was mentioned in the first video that there's this project called Holo. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So she was asking about the cryptocurrency associated with Holochain, and if I would talk a little bit about that and the goals of it, right? And the technology as utilized for that. Okay. So One of the apps you can build on Holochain is a cryptocurrency. And the first cryptocurrency is currently being built. It's called Holofuel. Holo is I explained earlier how since Holochain is an open source project, they needed to find a way to fund the team to continue to do the work, to develop this project, bring it forth and give it to the world. And the way they determined to do that was to, again, regarding adoption. So in having to possibly install Holochain might be a big ask. If you have to install Holochain on your device to run Junto, for instance. What they said is, well, why don't we have a way so that people could run Holochain apps without installing Holochain? And that's what Holo does. And Holo is a network. It's kind of a hosting platform in a way, but it's kind of this weird reversal of the equation. So there are peers running all over the world. There's about 3,000, I think, that got sold in the crowdfunding campaign. There's these little Holo boxes. You do not need a Holo box, but you can run a Holo box. These Holo boxes will serve Holochain applications. They'll run a Holochain node on the behalf of somebody who does not have Holochain. And for that, there's a very small microtransaction fee paid in Holofuel. So in order to instantiate the Holofuel into existence, they did an ICO that they called an initial community offering, which is different. The way it was rolled out was very different than all of the other ICOs that were going, where somebody wrote 20 lines of code and got the right PR firm, and in 20 minutes of their ICO starting, they raised $10 million or something. I mean, that was literally happening. These guys literally did everything they could not to raise too much money, not to get too wealthy, and they failed. So anyway, there's a currency called HOT that exists. It's an ERC20 token on Ethereum currently. When the Holo network launches later this year, it will be one-to-one exchangeable for Holofuel for a year window to exchange that. And the Holofuel is what will allow the payment system to happen for the people running Holochain on others' behalf.
Are there any legitimate criticisms that you know of relating to technology a bit, like from other people that are creating Holochain?
It's impossible. It doesn't make any sense. There's no way that can be possible. And that's pretty much what you hear. I mean, especially the people that are heavily invested, whether it's monetarily or energetically or just idealistically into blockchain. There's a big resistance barrier because none of that's necessary. One of the things that are going to happen, I predict, is that a lot of these blockchain projects that launch their own cryptocurrency network, in other words, they came up with an idea, we need a currency for turtles, I don't know, or more hemp or something like that. It's a great idea. Like, I'm obviously a big fan of hemp and that becoming a commodity and an exchangeable thing, but they wanted to create a cryptocurrency just for that. And so they hired a PR company, they wrote some code, they forked Bitcoin or Ethereum or something, and they created their own mining network. They got miners lined up to be their initial miners and did all this work and spent millions of dollars to create their own custom cryptocurrency network. And what they're going to find in a year or two, they're going to realize that was about 100 lines of Holochain code. And not only would they have had a functioning system, but that system would have been interoperable with all the other Holochain applications of cryptocurrency as well. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
We got one from Adam Waterhouse online, who's curious about the history of agent-centric computing, and if that was really a creation of Holochain, or if there are other people who are doing agent-centric computing for Holochain.
Good question. I don't know. But thanks, Adam. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, basically, you share after use any kind of data system which someone has a file code, like a movie file, for example. The movie file data gets distributed to other people, so other people can download that movie file. Every person has that movie file, then you're participating in a distributed ledger type network. That's really the best example, and it also teaches you a lot about how Holochain groups up as their user. Because if you ever go to download a movie with BitTorrent, there's only like 5 keys. It might take a long time. 100, that means hundreds of people have that movie file. And you're going to be getting bits of that movie file from all 100 of those locations. And so it's going to go fast. When you apply this to the idea of using a social network or using website education system, one of the main problems with scaling is that like if everybody floods the news website, that website servers have to be able to handle all those people or it goes down, right? And it will get slower and slower and slower to crash. So I have to try. Okay. That's slower, slower, slower. If you didn't have the server power, why? In this case, what happens is that because every user is in a sense caching the data of the network and literally holding and posting and sharing data among each other. If everybody likes the website a lot, the more people that go to it, the faster it's run, and the more efficient. We're exactly the opposite. That's a good concept.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we covered a little bit about BitTorrent probably in the beginning, but Adam Apollo, ladies and gentlemen, this guy has known the Holochain team longer than I have and understands this stuff and doing amazing work. Most of you probably know him, but thanks, Adam. Anybody who wants to, have something to say, come grab the mic because we do have some people online. So feel free to step on up. Any other questions about Holochain specifically before we take a break? There is some food and snacks available, I heard. I haven't confirmed that yet, but the food stand's supposed to be around here. We have the grocery store across the street.
Well,
Yeah.
there's a farm
Farm
stand.
stand.
The other side of the building. And if you guys want, they make these ancient grain South African pies. If people want those, they'll warm them up.
And yeah, so Richard's offering us a space. So if you're hungry at all, please do, support the space by getting a snack. And if there's any other questions, we're ahead of schedule, so we can please take some questions if there's any more. Yeah.
So we've been talking about this month with the team, like trying to help people who don't know about tech.
Help people who don't know about tech learn how to buy a cryptocurrency or like exchange a cryptocurrency. So I guess my question is, has the Holochain team or to your knowledge, have they considered that? Because there's a lot of people who just don't know how to like use it or how it applies to their life.
How to get some cryptocurrency.
Eric told me how to get hot.
Right.
But I know how to, but
Yeah. So is your question how to get hot?
no, my question is, have you guys talked about like communicating this, like buying cryptocurrency to people who don't know?
Yeah, I mean, these guys are so uninterested in the cryptocurrency aspect of this. They really, it's like the initial community offering.
Oh, really? So the whole
Yeah, they're just, I mean, it's there. They're all wealthy. There's no question, but it's just not the primary focus at all. Hands everywhere. Yeah, sure.
I was at a meetup in New York, a whole chain meetup, and I was with Eric Bear and a few other representatives of the team. And ultimately, just to give you an idea of the philosophy of the project, they don't want people coming in to like make money, right? Like they want people who are invested in the technology, who are invested in the idea, who are invested in the vision, to come, buy the token, because ultimately, right now, like what you might have heard with the SEC, like cracking down on different ICOs. The reason why is because tokens need utility. And Holochain's token, the one on ERC20, its utility is ultimately to be an exchange for the whole fuel once the whole fuel network is out, right? And the whole fuel, the reason why they're kind of like cutting that exchange later on is because the whole fuel is meant to power this network, not to make people rich. And so to my knowledge, as of this moment, and this may have changed, Red mentioned this, they have a year long where people that are buying the token early on, so that if you're a person developing an application, for example, Junto, we need to pay host to Holo host to kind of provide that hosting power for our network, right? And so we can buy these tokens early on and then exchange it for Holo fuel once the whole network is ready. And after then, we can kind of like pay these hosts, pay people who have participated in the Indiegogo campaign, which they raised over $1 million, and pay people who have kind of bought these holoports, cryptocurrencies to kind of, incentivize them to, financially to kind of provide their service. So, however, I did read on a channel that they're just leaving the holo token indefinitely, so that, like, take that with a grain of salt. I'll look more into it, so we can have official knowledge, and I'll ask a representative on it. But just to your point, I think that the reason why they haven't invested in so much in like educating people about like high or hot or like hot to the moon and stuff like that is because like they don't care, and they don't want people who are just purely financially motivated. Not to say that that's a bad thing. Like obviously you can.
So just a comment for me. Just a comment for me is that this all is very congruent. And so for me as an outside person looking in, the currency is just another aspect and facet of something that resonates with me. And so that's where my interest is in the currency.
Hi, I'm Miranda. I think the question might have been a little bit different from you than how it's being interpreted as well. Like how do we actually get community adoption and speak the language of people to use Holochain in general? And I am a community developer. I come from a world of holistic nursing to begin with, and then setting up healthcare systems that go community-wide, that become cooperatives and help take care of people through a co-ownership model. We are heavily interested in using Holochain because it helps us to be able to have feature sets that allow a community to see itself and to set up meta-currency. Meta-currency I've studied for the last 4 years, thanks to Adam Apollo and a lot of educating me on technology when I'm not a developer and I don't know a lot about technology, but the meta-currency world, a currency is a way that we can see flows of energy inside of a community that we cannot usually see. So anything that you would want to see that we can't see right now. And one of the hottest topics that we talk about in regenerative community development is proof of impact that can come with Holochain. So you're not backing your proof of impact with fiat currency. You don't have to go and buy a currency and say this is backed with money. You just use it to track the impact that you're making, which can become really big to see how much impact you're making and allow philanthropists to come in and providing positive impact in a community, or community leaders can interconnect things and start growing impact in ways that weren't seen before. And there's many levels within meta-currency and the meta-currency project that that's open source, that's free to anybody, that's peer-to-peer, that becomes faster the bigger you grow. All of these different things help a community that doesn't have money to pay in to use a system, but that wants to put lots of people on there, track little bitty transactions. But it still takes a lot of development from here, a lot of like UI, UX, a lot of dashboards that show us how to see this kind of stuff, a lot of ways that we interconnect and show each other this kind of thing, even once people start playing in it. But I hope that helps.
Cool. Thank you, Miranda. Magical Miranda. It's my housemate in Preston. Blows my mind every day. But I'm glad this came up because this is ultimately where we're headed with this discussion. We're just talking about the tech stuff now. We're going to talk about how this lands in the real world and how we start doing things differently as communities, building businesses, building organizations. That's where this is all headed. That's my personal special take and my offering to this ecosystem through what I'm calling CoGov, which is what we're going to get to after Junto. So I hope you all will be able to stick around the whole time because that's my favorite part. And unless we have any other questions, we'll go ahead and break down for about 20 minutes and come back and dive into Junto a little deeper. Came to just happen to be here in town for this particular moment in time to share their magic and about how we're going to rethink how we connect with social media and a digital platform. And with no further ado, all the way from Brooklyn, New York, Eric Yang and the Junto team.
Wow. We'll give everyone a few more minutes to trickle down.
about how you really start. Like, picture. Yeah. But I got this, before I got all of these.
All right. Well, thank you again for being here, and thank you for allowing me to have this floor. So our goal and the reason why we're here presenting today is because ultimately we just want to share this message and share this project with people who will potentially resonate with this and hold space for it in their, whether they're here in Denver, Boulder, Colorado, or wherever they may be. And so before I get into the project, we get asked a lot, how do you pronounce Junto? And so we don't really care. You can pronounce it however you want. It's a Spanish word. It means together, junto, and it's also Portuguese, junto. Some people call it junto. And so, it's fluid. Take ownership of it. Call it however, you feel comfortable with it. So with that in mind, let's start with some negativity. I'm just going to read this really quickly. I just added this like 2 seconds ago. So this is from Sean Parker, who used to be the president of Facebook, right? And so he says, God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains. The thought process that went into building these applications, Facebook being the first of them, was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible. And that means that we need to sort of give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented on a photo or a post or whatever. And that's going to get you to contribute more content, and that's going to get you more likes and comments. It's a social validation feedback loop, exactly the kind of thing a hacker like myself will come up with because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. These inventors, creators, it's me, it's Mark Zuckerberg, it's Kevin Systrom on Instagram, it's all of these people understood this consciously, and we did it anyway.
Wow.
So I think I'm not trying to drive home a lot of negativity here. I just think it's really important that we understand the gravity of the situation that we're in. And there are many facets to what's going on with social media. And I know that we saw, a few hands go up earlier in terms of understanding this issue. Does anyone want to share their understanding of kind of what's wrong with social media today? Just share your pet peeves. Just raise your hand if you have. All right, go ahead.
An organization that basically maintain a market cap of over $500 billion based solely on farm.
So he says, an organization like Facebook that has a market cap of over $500 billion based off of our own data. Yeah.
Black market availability.
The black market access to essentially your data, privacy, microphone. Anyone else? Yeah, as you had your hand up.
Well, I've never known a time without social media platforms, a double identity for every person. And personally, it made me feel real bad, and it still does make me feel really bad. Right? The comparison that is happening because our brains are programmed to do that. That's what these platforms are designed to do. And the social impact that has in high school, college students, especially for young people now, like 15-year-old people who just really live through those platforms. And I look at them and I'm like, whoa, and it's the same thing to me. So that's
Preach, sister. It's basically just getting to the false representation of that we curate and how that fosters a lot of mental health issues and external validation of self-worth.
Yeah.
So back in the day,
monitor and read every single post that you make and determine algorithmically if it's something that you should see. And for the reason why, like I just shared the other day that the Facebook things, or they've stored passwords in plain text. There's like 100 to 500
That just happened recently. Yeah.
I shared that and nobody saw it. And so it's like, it's pretty cool. It's like, they contact.
Adam?
Yeah, I mean, let me count the way. I guess the thing not top 5 things I hate about Facebook. The bait and switch. Hey, come and build stuff on our platform. Build your followers. Create a viral network. Then once you get to a certain level, we're just going to press stop on your viral reach and literally stop your pages overnight from growing. And then by the time you talk to us, all you're going to hear from us is you want to keep your page growing. You got to start paying $50 to $100 a day. Keep your organic, supposedly viral, supposedly natural reach. Continue. And that happens to every one of the pages right now. I have multiple pages with millions of followers. Every one of them is dead stop at the same time on the same day. Back in 2012, 2013, still unified. Yeah, basically. Switch for everybody.
See, I wasn't aware of that, so thank you for sharing that. In the back?
Yeah, add to that, I would say my product instead of viral in my algorithm instead of its profit algorithm, that's actually a problem. So that whole thing is like counter,
Yeah.
so like then the other is the level. How we are not getting what we need to get.
And to further that point, there's a lot of data that's coming out that shows that these algorithms are actually tweaked to really provoke a lot of fear and anger and divisiveness because, things that are like peaceful and like happy, like seeing a dog or seeing a penguin, stuff like that, like that like has some level of engagement, but not as much as like politics or other topics that, ultimately what you're getting at is that everyone has their own Truman Show, right? Everyone's feed is basically curated to, the reason why is their business model. So everyone's feed is basically curated to feed you what you want to see or feed you things that get you angry, get you mad, and ultimately creates more division than we actually as much time content as possible because the more they can sell to advertisers and third parties. And ultimately this gets leveraged in manipulative ways that can kind of really, tear democracy apart and already has been. And so the main things I'm hearing are, privacy concerns, ownership of information, algorithms, and then the social element to it of, having people feel like that they have to kind of fit this certain mold and this certain, social construct to feel accepted, and that's creating generational issues of mental health. And so, yeah, go ahead.
Another thing is like you have to try to get a follower group. You have to try to get people to see what you're creating. You don't have a platform that's designed for your projects to be discoverable by people who are actually interested in them. When you post on Twitter, your post goes into a vacuum. You don't have followers, so that we end up spending so much time trying to get followers. Another thing.
But don't worry, we have Gabriel. We had something.
Yeah, I was just gonna touch on that because of that, it's like the underlying intention is not to speak what is authentic, but to speak what is going to get more people to follow. And it's like that intention and that energy of that is throughout the whole platform. It's not designed for authenticity. Facebook is not designed to bring out more authentic expression. It's designed to make them money and to get more people in that capitalistic loop.
Yeah. Well, it seems like we have a pretty deep understanding of what's going on, and thankfully, we have a solution, and we're getting there. So this brings us to Junto and our mission, and essentially our mission is to kind of rebalance our relationship with technology. Because when you can rebalance your relationship with technology and not be addicted to it, not spend 6 to 9 hours a day on it, then you can start to rebalance your relationship with other people, your communities, and most importantly, really connect with yourself on a more authentic level, right? Not feeling that you have to continually like overanalyze everything that you're sharing, creating this ego, creating this third party like identity of yourself, and just really being free. And so, you know, for Junto, there are really 3 pillars to this. And the first one being that our platform is far more humanely designed. And we're going to touch on this later. And the second element of it is that it's distributed. It's powered by Holochain. It provides people with that sovereignty, agency, and ownership of data. And finally, it's not for profit as well. So this is an independent initiative that is grassroots and doesn't belong to me, doesn't belong to the team, doesn't belong to anybody. There are no shares that shareholders, kind of have in this organization. So before getting into this, a lot of our philosophy, and I think we didn't really touch on this in the previous presentation, but Holochain is actually very much inspired by nature, right? It's biomimicry inspired. It's inspired by how natural systems evolve and scale and coordinate and form. And so this is kind of how the approach that we've taken as well, right? How does real life actually work? How can we create more harmonious ways of social coordination? So here are 5 principles that have kind of guided the design of this platform. One of them is agency, giving people control over their experience, not feeding them algorithms, and just enabling people to kind of like create their own experience. And so accountability and transparency kind of go hand in hand. In order to have accountability, there needs to be some level of transparency. And then, authenticity is just the core of what we're trying to inspire. And finally, simplicity is, we don't want you on Junto like 6 to 9 hours a day. Like, get off social media. Like, go and like play with your dog or something. Like, just do something in the real world. Like right now, you have Facebook that has many, many, many features, right? And like, it's very cluttered. You don't actually need all of those things. And so we've really tried to cut back in terms of like what is essential, what is necessary. How can we design a platform that gets the job done, but that doesn't necessarily you don't need to be on social media like all day. So before going into the specific product features, everything in Junto, everyone has transparent social profiles, right? And there are no vanity metrics, for example, like buttons. We've kind of replaced this with something called resonations that we'll get into later. And the default is to have everybody's follower account be hidden. And so, but we do acknowledge that like, persons of influence in terms of like verifying identity, they need to like kind of validate that with the community. And so we provide people the option, but it's a matter of like giving people the choice of how they want to engage with the platform and kind of setting a standard from day one that this isn't like a currency or like a metric that we really value. Within Junto, there's absolutely no AI. So we have no artificially intelligent news feeds that kind of create those echo chambers that we're talking about. And yes, there are absolutely no advertisements. There will never be. We don't own, track, or sell your information. And so you don't have to worry about it. So let's kind of dive deeper. We don't have all the solutions right now, and we're hoping to get feedback from this crowd. Ultimately, we're just sharing like a progression of where this is at right now. So in Junto, you have this kind of lotus-looking thing on the bottom, right? And so within Junto, you can create an ever-expanding number of ways. And to start, we're going to have long form where you can add like photos, videos, longer text, like a story almost. There's going to be short form where there's this beautiful like background that you can just add, a character limit on it. You can, share photos, create an events, etc. Ultimately, what we want to do is this expression center is going to grow and evolve into an infinite number of expressions, where it becomes kind of like an app store where you can kind of pick and choose what you want and customize your doc in terms of how you want to do it. And the beauty of like Holochain is that applications are interoperable. And so a lot of these expressions can actually be microservices and microservice Holochain applications that other people develop. And within the collective, this is like the collective like consciousness, awareness, whatever of Junto, right? And so this is where everything exists And so if you go to the collective sphere, this is where everything in Junto from anyone exists in chronological order. Within the collective, you have a selective feed that Dora dubbed for us because she didn't like following and followers, so we just kind of like went with selective. It's due to change. Basically, it's a feed of people that you've chosen to, to see their posts. But then this is where it gets a little more interesting. You can actually create your own spheres, right? So if you want to create a sphere of bolder, technology, then you can just add whoever you want. And it's just a way for you to kind of self-organize perspectives and like people in your lives. And then there's also channels. And so channels are also kind of like topics. And so a channel can be anything, a location, technology, spirituality, design, food. And you can also add channels into these spheres as well to kind of like give you that depth of customization. Now, this is the feature. This is the next layer. This is the feature that we're kind of still, tweaking. But ultimately, we want to enable anybody to create their own community. And it's pretty simple. So, a community is just its own layer of expressions. And then within each community, what we've kind of talked about is having a meta layer. So communities can belong to any other community, right? Does anyone here know of ecstatic dance? Yeah. All right. Wasn't there one this morning? I think we missed it. Okay. All right. Anyway, so ecstatic dance is like, a community. And then a meta of ecstatic dance could be dance, right? And so the admins of dance and the admins of ecstatic dance can kind of agree to be, meta and sub. And then a sub of ecstatic dance could be ecstatic dance folder, ecstatic dance NYC. And then within ecstatic dance NYC, you can have a sub community of that, which is, ecstatic dance organizers, right? And so it's kind of a way, like each community is a gateway for people to discover other communities as well. By the way, feel free to stop me at any point and ask questions. We don't have to wait until the end. So this is kind of one of the core innovations of our product. It's called the pack. And so if you haven't noticed, Junto is a wolf theme. And I saw that someone had a wolf outside. I don't know whose whose dog that was, but yeah. Is that yours, Ray?
No.
Okay, cool. So everyone has their own pack, and what a pack essentially is we like to define it as an agent-centric community, right? And so who we are really is more than what we choose to share about ourselves. Like who we are is really an influence of the people, of the sum of people that have influenced us in our lives, right? And so imagine a feed of everything that I choose to share publicly, or if this is your pack, you choose to share publicly, and everything that people in your pack choose to share publicly, but also things that you choose to share privately to your pack. And remember I mentioned that we got rid of the like button. This is where resonations come in. And so everything that you choose to resonate, this kind of gets recycled into your packs. And now there's more intention in engaging with content. And so you're not just going to go passively like things if this, is kind of shared with other people in your pack. And so ultimately, in my pack, if I have like many people from different parts of my life, I'm suddenly this thread of mutual connection, right? People can visit my pack and kind of get to explore other people's content and meet people in a much more organic way. Finally, there's the den layer, which is kind of your like private headspace. You can keep things to yourself. Some things you share, you're just not ready to share publicly or privately with people. But we want to provide people with that level of vulnerability to kind of open up and just have the space for themselves. So all of this is powered by Holochain. And before I go into this, I want to give a quick shout out to Adam and Powell, because the way that we found Holochain, and you don't know this, is actually through one of the engineers that used to be on the team, kind of went through this rabbit hole and went through your work, and through your work, we kind of found Holochain. And then we reached out to Arthur Brock, it was about October of 2017. And since then, we made a shift from Ethereum to Holochain. And so initially, we started off with blockchain architecture and realized it wasn't, energy efficient, scalable, et cetera. And so with Holochain, when you have information that is processed and served from a distributed network of computers, we don't have a license of your data. We don't own it. and therefore we can't track it and we can't sell it to advertisers and third parties. And ultimately, this makes this more private and secure, and also more censorship resistant when you have, a global network of distributed computers instead of just centralized farms that kind of like, give this information to you. And I want to invite Josh up here to kind of speak to how specifically with Junto this kind of invites new opportunities.
So one of the interesting things that we've been working with is Eric touched on communities briefly, and one of the things that we've been kind of doing with communities is the idea that we think it's a bit naive to say that we know how a social network should exactly operate. Like different communities require different things from a social network. Like maybe a school who has their own social network and community doesn't want like profanity on the network. So what we decided to do was to think about taking our DHT and allowing other communities to take it into their own context, and then we can work with them to change their validation rules so that they can like tailor their applications how they want it. So maybe they don't want video posts on their social network, or they don't want, like I said, profanity or whatever it is. Each community has their own needs from what they want for their people, and that's something that we can do with Holochain. Is we can allow people to take like an agent-centric approach to their own community, their own network. So yeah, that's really.
Yeah, I was wanting me to talk about tags. So wait, tags in what context? There you go.
Okay, so I just wanted to like dig a little deeper and like how we envision it will be to use this platform. So what are you gonna do like when you're using Junto? So you're gonna create an expression with the little expression icon that Eric was talking about, but once you create an expression, and there's a variety of different ways you can do that, you tag it with 3 to 5, we haven't decided the number yet, tags basically, or channels. So you're sending it into the global collective feed basically to be discovered by others in this kind of open library basically. So yeah.
So essentially what she's getting at is like in Junto you can create in any way, but not only that, you can discover information in any way on your own terms, right? Compare that to existing social networks. You have Facebook, they don't really let you discover in your own way. It's just kind of like, here's an algorithm that we've decided that is best for you, and now you have to see information in our perspective. But here is your perspective. We're giving people more autonomy. And ultimately, the thing with social media that we need to change is encouraging people to be more intentional about the experience, right? So that way you're not spending as much time on it, hopefully. The last kind of pillar of Junto is that it's not for profit, which means this is, again, independent of any third parties and investors that could potentially alter the direction that we take moving forward. And so you see, those of you on Snapchat may have noticed last year or 2 years ago, they had like a very big UX change, like user interface, user experience change. And the reason why is because they have as a public company, the public shareholders, they have a fiduciary obligation to their investors first. And that obligation is the bottom line. They have to make money. And the way that a lot of these social networks make money is through advertising. And so it kind of diluted the experience. A lot of their product philosophy shifted because, it was a for-profit institution. And for us, our technology is open source as well. Like we haven't released Junto, I just told you all our secrets. So, feel free to take what you want from it, borrow it, change it, alter it, doesn't matter. Josh here, has open source our Holochain application repository that you can visit at github.com/JuntoFoundation/Junto. So if you want to take a look at our code, feel free to do that as well. And this is funded by many individuals. So some of you may know that we just concluded a Kickstarter campaign, and it was successful. So who here actually knew about that or donated to that? Raise your hand. Wow, that's a lot of supporters. Yeah, thank you so much for for helping out with that. Thank you especially to Ray, who offered us a very generous, very generous financial contribution. And so for us, Junto is funded by many people, not just a handful of investors. It's just donors, and another one of the donors includes Arthur Brock, one of the co-founders of Holochain as well. So he kind of helped fund this project through some Ether before we launched the Kickstarter. And if you want to get involved still, there's an Indiegogo in-demand campaign that we extended. And so if you want to reserve your username, kind of get early access to the beta, receive some Junto swag, we got some cool t-shirts and hoodies on the way, you can do that as well. But a sustainable path forward, as a nonprofit, we have to be, practical still and identify ways that we can fund this project. And so ultimately right now we're in the stage of crowdfunding. This Kickstarter money is giving us the runway that we need to release. And then in the meantime, we've been speaking with institutional donors like Craig, who started Craigslist, through Newmark Philanthropies, as well as Bo Xiao, who kind of runs the Wall Foundation. You guys may have heard of them, but those are conversations that we'll revisit later. But ultimately, we want to, integrate some sustainable revenue source. And right now, and this is always open to change, right now we're looking at a revenue or a subscription model where, we can use this as an opportunity to educate people that when you don't pay for the product, you ultimately end up becoming the product. And, we need to make this shift towards recognizing that. And this also will serve as a more recurring, sustainable measure of scaling as well. So I want to invite Yaz up here, who is our outreach firepower, to kind of talk about the community building aspect side of things, and take it away.
Hi guys. I haven't done this in a while. I've been practicing for the past 2 hours, talking into a microphone. But first of all, thank you, Eric, for explaining everything. Thank you to this team. You guys are my family. And also I'm so happy to be here. And I remember when I first met Eric and he told me about this, I was like, I'm gonna drop out of college to do this. He was like, come. So I ended up not telling my parents I was planning on doing this, packed real light, went back to the University of Rochester, and then 2 weeks later, Eric came in a car, packed up my stuff. Drea, who went to college with me, is the reason that I met Eric in the first place. She threw a surprise goodbye party for me, and then I moved to Brooklyn, and I remember thinking, wow, there's gonna be a day where we stand up in front of a group of people who actually want to hear what's going on, and today is that day, because this vision is so, it goes so deep. I was born in 1997, which is the first year that social media existed. So, sorry guys. Woo! It's crazy. It's crazy. There's no other generation that's always had this technology attached to our personalities and to everything that we're doing. So it is about the real world. It's about what we do in our daily lives, about what we care about. I'm an artist. We're all artists. I make music, I write, and I want to share that. I want to stand up and not feel nervous to talk to people, because I'm shaking out of nervousness, and maybe that comes from comparing myself to other people. And what really breaks that down is feeling like you're in a community, and that's kind of what we're trying to create. So the first year that I was working with these people, we saw a lot of organic growth of a community, but all based on one-on-one conversations and interactions where it sparks a different thread for every person. Why do we need a new social media platform, a new way to convene communities, a new way to empower our individuality, authenticity? So basically, we moved into a Bronx house thanks to Arthur Brock's donation a couple months ago in October. And that was the beginning of hosting small meetups, basically having friends come over and talking about this idea, and basically creating a space that invited a lot of differences, a lot of different ways of communicating, different ways of dressing, different ways of articulating oneself, so many differences, and really bringing them to light and seeing how amazing all of our differences are. It's a rough social world out there. There's a lot of weird social dynamics perpetuated by these online platforms, and it's so refreshing to be able to have a community of people, this team, and the extended external team. We have a volunteer community now, some of you might know about, but yeah, so events is what we started to kind of put together in a very casual way in the Bronx House, and really feeling that energy, that open energy. And we want to translate that into a lot more open events that we have in New York, but basically empowering other communities around the world to host their own events. So the vision for this team kind of extending is really, really big. So I like to call Junto PAC, which is our volunteer community, the external team, because I always say that this is a continuous conversation between a lot of different people, but we invite your ideas. So we want to hear what you guys want to do. We want to collaborate in creating events that are anything from sitting and eating watermelon together, group stretching, or talking about technology, talking about activism, the environment. So I guess what I really want to say is that this all comes back to empowering what we care about doing in our daily lives. Dora, for example, really cares about the environment so much. And what if there were a platform that encouraged us to learn about these important issues that we need to know about, or learn these facts that kind of like blow our minds and make us realize we need to care more about the earth? Or Drea, visual artist, Kyle, visual artist, how can I, and a writer too, how can I share a story with the community of people that will actually care about it, you know? So kind of trying to connect all of these dots, but empowering those connections to bring them back into the real world, which we're kind of missing. We're all glued to our screens. So what else is here? Yeah. Okay. Sign up for our beta if you haven't. That's one way that you can get involved. And just like I said, there's an external team that you can get involved with as well. We have a public Slack channel that kind of holds a lot of our conversations, and you can join it whenever you want. So you can kind of keep up with what's going on. Yeah. Anything else I'm missing? Because this is crazy.
Thank you. You can see why I asked her to drop out of college and join us.
You guys
I mean, you know, right now we have a lot of exciting partnerships growing as well. How many of you guys have heard of Douglas Rushkoff? Team Human. He just agreed to be our official advisor. He was voted by MIT. Yeah, he was voted by MIT as one of the world's top 10 intellectual influencers, and he has. I want to promote his book for him. So, like, he has a book called Team Human, right? Identifying that we're all on the same team and how we can work together to kind of create new systems that Ray was referring to, and kind of, you know, shift this new paradigm together. I just like to close, you know, and talk about how Junto really is about, you know, inspiring. So go ahead. Douglas, D-O-U-G. Watch Douglas get more feedback from. Never mind. Okay, it's Douglas, D-O-U-G-L-A-S space Rushkoff, R-U-S-H-K-O-F-F. And his website is rushkoff.com. His book is Team Human. But yeah, I mean, if you guys are excited about, you know, helping really introduce this new social layer, this new social wave, and inspire authenticity, inspire more empathy and more open-mindedness, deeper connection with other people and ourselves, you know, please feel free to talk to anybody on this team. Again, our entire team is like sitting at that table, and then Josh and Yaz here and myself. And then we have the communication channel you can open, that you can join. Just ask us for an invite and we got you. And yeah, feel free to sign up for a beta, and we look forward to meeting you guys after this, after Ray kind of, you know, speaks more about CoGov. So,
easier to talk face to face. Usually. Please talk to me.
but yeah, I mean, other than that, I'd like to open up the floor for some questions if there are any.
I think questions with Holo and the interoperability. Is this something that you guys are thinking about? And I might have missed this when I was out there, but where other social media platforms can interoperate, so it's not just one brand.
Yeah. Well, that kind of takes us back to this slide here in this expression center, where essentially, you know, you can create in any sort of fashion on Junto, but this is going to evolve with the community. So if someone wants, you know, something for journalism specifically, or writing poetry, but in addition to that, we can kind of like integrate other Holochain applications into the center as well.
But yeah, not only that, I mean, one of the things that it's a little awkward, maybe Eric, for you to say, for your team to say, is that, you know, all of this interoperability stuff on Holochain, everything they're bringing forward and all the ideas they have are going to work because we like them. And the second we don't like those ideas, right, we can fork it. That's what's possible with Holochain. And so, but the energetic, so the reason that I love these guys and I support what they're doing is because they know that and they take that to heart and they love the feedback and they're loving the interaction and the co-creative capacity that Holochain invites. And it doesn't just invite it, it requires it, right? Because the second somebody doesn't like the direction you're going with your project, they fork it and they do their own thing. And so the best thing we can do is learn to be community together, learn to collaborate together. Because if we have 6 forks of social networks, it's going to be harder for all of us to collaborate. So, it's like it's such a key principle as to what Holochain brings forth. I really just wanted to speak to that.
That's also why everything is open source as well. But go ahead.
I was just wondering, since this is a nonprofit platform, but it is going to be subscription based, what's in place to ensure that, I mean, if Junto meets a wild success, then everybody ends up using the social media platform. What's to ensure that these subscription fees go to the places that the community wants to see it go to in terms of growth as a social media platform?
So essentially he's saying, since this is not for profit, right, how can we ensure that the revenue that we make goes back into the welfare of the communities? I'm glad you brought that point up because that's something I just didn't bring up, is we want to enable some level of distributed governance in the future, right? And this is why we need a recurring and source of revenue that we can kind of like measure every month instead of just having like random donations. We can kind of identify, look, everybody in this community, everybody that's a member of Junto can participate and where this money goes. For example, we're a 501, we're in the process of officially being a 501c4 nonprofit. And what that means is that we're tax exempt, right? And so that saves us about 20-30% of our revenue from being taxed. We can reallocate this back into local communities. And more importantly, we can grow an ecosystem where we fund other projects that are aligned with our values and mission to kind of really create more than just Junto. For us, we see Junto as a social layer over this technical layer called Holochain to kind of facilitate a lot of the different projects and organization and collaboration that we'd like to see. And to your last point, like being a nonprofit, it's legally binding for us, like not put the money back in our pockets, right? Like there's no shares in the organization as well.
So how do you distinguish censorship resistant from saying you don't want videos on your site? Or, that to me seems like an interesting area of I'm controlling what's showing up on my platform, but
Are you referring to the communities layer?
Yes. Okay.
Ultimately, what Josh was getting at is that this is agent-centric, right? So anyone that creates their own community, just to kind of backtrack a little bit, anyone can create any community and communities can be the same name as of now, right? And so if 2 people create a community called Ecstatic Dance, it really depends on like how that community is run for people to join it, right? And so if that community isn't being run in a way that people enjoy, then like you can just like join the other community or create one yourself. But ultimately communities, we don't want to dictate how communities can run. We want communities to kind of dictate how those communities run themselves. And so ultimately people that join these communities are kind of agreeing to those social rules, right? Like that community is saying, this is how this community works. And if you don't like it, then don't participate in it. Or if you don't like how that community is run in general, then maybe someone else can kind of fork it and create a new community and other people can kind of join that as well. Yes, you have a question?
I'm curious what you guys think about.
I'm curious to have a conversation about what you guys think about the interface and it's clear how it works. And if you guys have questions about that / like thoughts about it, anybody? So totally clear?
So for me, it's hard to see because it's small pictures up there. Do you have mock-ups for
Yes. So there's a lot of information that you can return to learn about how all of this works. There's one particular Medium article called Rebalancing Our Relationship with Technology. And that's a very detailed, holistic explanation of how the interface works and why it's awesome. And then there's also a little video we put together of Eric talking about how the interface works that you can see too. So hopefully I can share this in the Facebook group maybe after, probably.
Two things to add on to that. So Holochain and Junto collaborated on a thing called Happy Hour, which is where they bring on a project to kind of discuss the technical architecture. Josh was in that hall as well. If you guys are more curious about the Holochain design as well, not just the front end, then feel free to visit that. Josh goes into detail into how exactly he architected the platform, and he's here in person. So if you want to like catch him while he's here before he can slide away and do that after. The other thing is that our website is www.junto.foundation. That's junto.foundation. So everything is on the site, but our emails are also on there. So please feel free to reach out to us directly, and we'll always make time to answer any questions you guys might have. Is there anything else? All right, sweet. Well, if anything else comes up, we'll be here, and I think we're just going to take another 20-minute break right here.
So yeah, so I hope this is making sense, the progression of the conversation. I thought it was key to put Junto as the next step. So we explained how Holochain works fundamentally, got into a little bit of the tech. And then I think this brings it home a little bit more in terms of, I hope some of the examples, since we all use social media on a regular basis, the examples of how we're going to transform social media with this kind of really hits home the possibility that it fundamentally shifts, and the things we build on it can fundamentally shift. And so the next thing that we're going to talk about after another break is how we fundamentally shift our coherence building and team building, and which means businesses, which means activist groups, which means chess club, which means government ultimately. How do we fundamentally shift the way all of those things operate because of this fundamental shift in technology? And that's my passion project called CoGov, and we'll talk about that after a break. Thank you all.
Great. Can we say one more thing?
Sure.
Hey guys, one more thing. I felt called to speak about why this is so important for upcoming generations, because social technology is not going to go away. We rely on it for everything. And young people, younger than me, we need a new platform to help facilitate what they're doing, but also using the internet as a tool to like help us. There's such a wealth of information online, but I would say it almost seems like young people are not curious about the information that they can find online because we don't use social technology to kind of learn from one another. So I'm really excited to see how something like this can influence youth communities, honestly, and because kids are so curious and passionate. So it'll be cool to see them explore using a platform like this.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We're going to talk about CoGov now, and that's collaborative governance. So I come from the libertarian ilk, where we're all about freedom and sovereignty and stuff. And I still believe that is the fundamental place to start. We talk about transforming society, is full recognition of our individual sovereignty, our individual power, our individual freedom. But then it goes to the next conversation about how do we then unify. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. But a lot of times the libertarians just get stuck in that drive for personal freedom and power and never move beyond that. And that's okay. But there is no such thing as absolute freedom. We all govern each other with every interaction we have in some form or another. And so that was the realization I kind of came to one day, I don't know, 6 or 8 years ago or something. And if we're all going to recognize the fact that we govern each other, then let's figure out how to collaboratively govern each other. As much transparency and as much openness as possible, as much sharing, as much integral work, as much, honesty, and lots of other things. But so that's what started the idea of how could that actually look. And it didn't really land as to how this could be possible until I found Holochain, because Holochain is the unenclosable carrier. Again, it's the agent-centric view that is the digital representation of sovereignty. So that was the critical piece. The next evolution. This is I don't even know much about Bella Banafia, but this quote really drove it home for me as to what the conversation is here. Is I have become increasingly convinced that even if people fully develop their potential, they cannot give direction to their lives, they cannot forge their destiny, they cannot take charge of their future unless they also develop competence to take part directly and authentically in the design of the systems in which they live and work, and reclaim their right to do so. This is what empowerment is all about. Right into that. So what I mean a little bit by that is that we had the founding of the United States of America wasn't perfect in any way. The Constitution made slavery, black people are 3/5 of the person. It made of course we were abusing the indigenous population in ways that but there was something fundamentally beautiful about the values brought forth in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution that was recognized and felt around the world. And America represented something very unique and special for a long time. And those values and the system we built around those values was one form of governance. It was a game we set up. And once you set up a system, once you set up a game for people to play, people will play it to their own advantage. It took us like 200 years to realize that this government, this United States of America, pure constitutional government, was being gamed, right? And it's getting pretty obvious at this point. And so this quote talks about how we need to feel empowered to be able to recreate and reiterate our governmental structures on a constant basis. And that's one of the core principles in the Declaration of Independence. The thing is, in those days, when we were writing things on parchment and it took 2 months to get across the ocean, it slowed the process down a little bit. Nowadays, with digital technology and sovereign digital technology, we have the ability to do this and iterate this very rapidly. And I think that's the critical piece that's going to transform society. So technology itself is neither good nor bad. It stimulates discovery and innovation along the line of the intentions of the humans that implement it. Wise utilization of that technology can lead to a single distributed, interconnected, species-level brain. Right? So our brain manages to function and take good care of our bodies most of the time for most of us. This pattern is fractal and can replicate at a species level. And I believe that we're just not, we don't have the coherence to do that right now. But you can see other species do it. You can see the bees do it. You can see the ants do it in all these amazing ways. They're actually possibly, as a group, as a hive, more intelligent than we are. But yet they're a bunch of individuals. So I think we have the opportunity to elevate to that kind of coherence as humans. The goals of CoGov are to create a shared protocol by which all humans can eventually feel empowered and have visibility and influence in all of the critical systems that affect their lives. To allow experimentation into what a new human interoperation systems for business, economy, and government could look like. So rethinking everything. If we can just start all over, there's no money, there's no Federal Reserve, there's no government, there's no UN, there's none of that. What could, if we pretended none of that existed, right? What could we start with from a pure concept? Well, then from there, let's talk about how we want to interact with those other people. An unenclosable ecosystem of voluntary human exchanges. All exchanges being voluntary is critical. And ensure a feedback loop. It always exists between technology and the wisdom of the highest human consciousness, organic intelligence, as opposed to artificial intelligence, which sometimes we get the idea that we're going to create technological intelligence that can analyze data and make decisions better than we can. And I think there's some use to that, and we'll talk about that. But getting feedback from digital technology is good, getting information, doing an informational analysis, proposing decisions, but always coming back to the highest human consciousness to make sure we're on the right track, to reiterate the computational processes that we've implemented through the AI. That kind of thing is critical. What CoGov is not. CoGov is not a specific proposal of how groups should govern themselves. It's not a specific proposal of how businesses should operate or co-operate. It's not an application, and it's not even an interface. What it is a software layer that empowers experimentation and social coordination through flexible creation of interfaces for transparent and interoperable governance, value identification, and value exchange. It's designed to be able to be used for businesses, NGOs, governments, activism, clubs, and I've identified that the executive, legislative, and judicial branches that were set up again in the U.S. government are pretty sensible categories of governance operations. Executive being making decisions in the day-to-day things that need to happen. Legislative meaning more like agreement creating. This is where we can agree that something is more a permanent way of analysis or looking at something that we can all agree should move forward, and we don't have to talk about the same thing every time. And then if those agreements come into conflict, if there's a breaking of the agreement and parties are in dispute, we need to be able to resolve that, and that's the judicial branch. As we discussed in the Holochain presentation earlier, this really all started with at the bottom of the stack, the idea of metacurrency. And again, that is the idea that even if we wanted to create, if there were rulers on the planet that wanted to create a world where everybody could thrive, have access to all their basic needs and reach their highest potential, they couldn't do it because they don't have the metrics. The only value exchanges that we're tracking are monetary exchanges. We're doing all kind of brilliant analysis on those monetary exchanges, but we're not doing analysis on all the other exchanges that are happening, which are possibly the vast majority of them. So metacurrency proposed how we could bring transparent metrics to those kind of exchanges in the world, identify them as currency, see the current in the flow of exchange that's happening already, right? Currency, see the current. And then Holochain was the network layer, the unenclosable carrier by which we could transmit those transactions, that we could see that flow actually happen, that we could create a ledger by which we could see that flow happening in actual numbers and digits and things like that. CoGov is a layer built on top of Holochain. One way Holochain is described sometimes is the protocol of protocols. What that means is, let's say the English language is a protocol, and the dictionary is what defines that protocol. But yet, there's always evolutions in the language. The dictionary is not always on top of all of the words that are evolving, and vice versa. So the protocol of protocols is the means by which we change and grow and evolve our protocol, our language, for instance. The protocol of protocols is that layer. And Holochain is that. It's this open layer where all of these different means of transacting information can be defined and agreed upon and iterated. And so CoGov is the protocol, this being that I'm proposing, that we are proposing for governance operations, for decision-making, sense-making, value identification in the metacurrency sense, and value exchange in the metacurrency sense. So we're just proposing the specific protocols. Somebody has to do it, right? So I took a stab at it, and thank you for being here to listen to my version. And then on top of CoGov, this is where we actually build interface. This is where we actually have apps on our phone. This is where we actually have tools to help groups organize, to identify the currencies that they're operating in and exchange with each other, to make sense, make decisions in a transparent way. All of those interfaces are built on top of CoGov, and it is not my particular intention at this moment in history to be building those interfaces, because I did think about doing that for a long time, being a developer, I could sit down and just say, hey, here's a really great way to make decisions and they operate as a group. But when I got halfway through that process, I realized, this isn't the only way, and this is okay way, but there's lots of other great ways. And everybody has their other, I'm not going to be the guy to propose the one way it should always be done. So I stepped back and went to the meta layer. If all the brilliant ideas for people that are coming forth of how to make decisions and interoperate and create coherence as a group are evolving naturally, let's try to have those groups working together. And it's only through all those different means working together that we are going to achieve the scalability necessary to compete with the current paradigm. So, one of the things that I like to just like Eric said about going negative for a second, it's really, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but it is kind of like an inherent fact of nature that there is this struggle going on for power in various ways. All living beings are engaged in a struggle for power on some level. Power to survive, thrive, create, express, procreate. We live in a world of very complicated and often invisible human power constructs. Things are happening and we don't even know who has the power or why it's happening that way. That's often, when we don't know what's happening, it's often political power. This political power versus spiritual power is something I picked up from M. Scott Peck, who's a pretty brilliant author. He wrote The Road Less Traveled, and the book that was really one of life changing for me was called A World Waiting to Be Born. He talked about the difference here in power and where political power is something that you need to use force or coercion to have go a certain way. Your ability to force or coerce others into your way is political power. The ability to stand in your presence and offer an idea and have people resonate with that idea and to create group cohesion around that idea, that's spiritual power. That's how he defined it. So nothing too woo-woo about that, but it is important to identify, the different ways that power happens in the world. And, ultimately, I guess we could say that if we could have more of the power that's moving in our society, be spiritual power, be somebody standing up and saying, I have a great idea, and other people trusting and recognizing the goodness and that coherence moving things forward, I think we'd be in a much better world, rather than somebody saying, this might be okay for society, it's going to be really good for me, and I'm going to get the government, I'm going to get the Federal Reserve, I'm going to get the Facebook, I'm going to get whatever it is, I'm going to get them on my side and have them coerce people into that. So part of what I want to bring forth with this CoGov is getting real about that the struggle is part of the natural order. And the best we can do is just recognize that and do our best to reduce the strife and conflict that evolves out of that kind of power struggle. The core values of CoGov are interoperability, unenclosability, transparency, scalability, rapid iteration, and resilience. Go through those. Interoperability. CoGov offers a fully transparent interoperability layer that opens up the doorway for organizations to use any number of sovereign governance models and interfaces, use any number of value identification and exchange methodologies, and to seamlessly transition between them while minimizing or even removing the difficulties of that transition. Unenclosable communication. I talked a little bit about this earlier. So this is critical to group cohesion, to be able to know that the expressions of the individuals are being heard and that expression is authentic and true. If we don't have that, we have intermediaries, we have bureaucracy. Dunbar's number comes into play here, where Dunbar's number was a study that proposed that after a certain number of social connections, you weren't able to keep track anymore, essentially. That you can essentially know who somebody is, know a little bit about their personality, know how much you trust them, know their strengths and weaknesses. But after a certain number of people, you just can't remember anymore, and you start to forget and you start to lose that information. So communities where everybody can know each other in that deeper way of about 150, 120, depending on who you ask, or less, communities of that size or less, have the ability to create a cohesiveness and a coherence with each other that can't happen once you start going beyond that number, because what happens then is you need to rely on others' information about people. You can no longer trust your own judgment, you can no longer trust your own experience, but you have to rely on others. And at that point, politics start happening, because people can obviously say things that aren't true about other people and create opinions that aren't true about other people. And a whole other layer of complicated social dynamics kicked in, and we can see the results of that any day. And turn on the TV or open the newspaper. So through Holochain, CoGov provides a means for digitally recording critical social activity in a way that accurately represents the expressions of the actors. Transparency. So here's my stab. If this was true for me, and this one of those moments when you think something's true for you, it might be true for other people, and I took a big stab at what people really want to know about what's going on in our social systems on the planet. People want to know who stewards makes decisions about assets that they interact with. They want to know how decisions are being made about those assets. They want to know what, when, why did certain decisions get made. They want to know how the stewards of those assets reach their levels of influence. They want to know how they can have a voice in the conversation. How can they have influence? Like, how can they become a steward? They want to know what asset value is being exchanged and with who. They want to know what to do if it feels like the stewards of an asset are making bad decisions that affect them, their community, or the ecosystem we all share. So in providing those values, if we could live in a world where that was happening at the highest levels of government, I think we would all be better off. But I think we have the opportunity here to model that at lower levels of government. When we're building our business, when we're collaborating in groups, when we have an idea for how to change the economy, when we have the idea for a beautiful location in Boulder and how to transform it into a sustainable and regenerative community space, just like is happening here at the Riverside. So in order to have that kind of transparency, in order to have transparency in what groups are doing and how they're making decisions, and to bring all that forth that I just mentioned, what do we need to record? When I say record, I'm talking, of course, about what do we record on the distributed ledger technology, which is, in this case, I'm proposing Holochain. Of course, there are lots of ways to record things. Holochain, we've talked about the reasons why that's a good one, and what we need to record about people coming together. Fundamentally, what is similar, what is good to know when people come together in a group? They have a shared purpose. They have a vision and a mission. They have assets. They have something to steward. Generally, I mean, these are the things that ought to be recorded. I mean, if you're coming together to just talk about knitting, that's one thing. But when you're coming together to talk about how to provide textiles to your community, that's a whole different conversation. So at that point, you're going to be stewarding some kind of asset, some way, and that's what makes it meaningful. That's one way it's meaningful to the external, I guess I should say, right? Record levels of influence within the group. So inherently, when a group comes together, there's just going to naturally be higher and lower levels of influence. Whether you agree on making that a formality or not is up to you as a group, obviously up to the group forming. But generally, that exists, and it's good in order to know and to have a sense for external parties and understand what's happening within the group and how decisions are being made. It's good to know what the levels of influence are by the various members of the group stewarding that particular asset. A group comes together, they have plans and agreements, and they have a means of value exchange. These are common things that all groups at some level have. And this is the proposal to start recording those in the ledgers. These are the things that we would want to record. Of course, in terms of privacy, the step to make the recording happen, to record something in the ledger, is always an option, right? So just in case anybody gets privacy concerns at this point, they just want to presence that clearly. Ultimately, I think transparency is key. Again, I think that that's really important. I think that's the direction we're moving. But forcing anybody to be more transparent than they're ready to be is also not a good. What do we need to record about decision and sense making within a group? 4 fundamental things ultimately happen no matter how you go about making decisions or having discussions. There's 4 things that it seems to me that it boils down to happening. There's a proposal. Somebody says, hey, we could do this. There's some kind of iteration of that proposal. There's a discussion that happened. It could totally transform the proposal. It could result in a completely different proposal at the end, but it was still an iterative process from the original proposal. So it makes sense to me that that's a good way to record it. There's a resolution. At some point, there's going to be a discussion that either we're tired of talking about this, it's not going anywhere, we're not creating coherence, let's table it, let's resolve, or there's some decision that, okay, we've agreed, we've created some coherence, let's move forward with something, and that results in some kind of action. What do we need to record about value exchanges? This is fairly straightforward, I think. The type of currency, the quantity of the currency, the sending account, and the receiving account. Those are already pretty commonly reported in ledgers in distributed ledger technology. Scalability. So my theory is that digital technology can actually allow us to increase Dunbar's number significantly. And I think that allows us to create deeper and greater coherency at a larger scale. So in other words, by having digital tools, you have the better ability to keep sense of who you're interacting with in ways, and we can get it from 100 to 200, say. I think that, and you scale that up, you take that the exponential math on that, I think that makes a big difference in the world. New social models that cannot provide the benefits of an economy of scale will have a hard time attracting folks in that. We have an opportunity now to create examples of scalable ecosystems that are designed from the highest possible level of consciousness. While it's not the goal specifically, it is a real possibility that a protocol like CoGov, built on Holochain, is capable of managing resources on a global scale. And I say it in quote because managing doesn't carry the right kind of frequency for me about what I'm talking about, but in terms of comparing it to what's happening now, in terms of how the UN or the national governments are managing resources that affect all of us, we can do better. The goal is the transformation of socioeconomic system to form with minimal centralization of power and minimal political hierarchy, so that at some point, managing resources isn't an appropriate description. So we have something more like a meritocracy, where people that end up stewarding assets that we all share are doing so because they have the experience, and they have the knowledge, they have the goodwill of the people to do so, not because they're somebody's nephew or because they were born in a certain place, or because they were elected in a media campaign that managed to bamboozle people, all of this kind of thing. CoGov aims to give individuals and communities tools to help them feel empowered for the recognition of their place within the whole. The transparency brings a holopticism. The buzzword these days, holopticism, the ability to really see and understand your place. And from that, from a place of personal empowerment and a place of visibility to see the whole, I think we all are better people. We all are better givers. We all operate more from our heart than those two things. CoGov aims to support individuals and communities in deciding for themselves how they can contribute to a balanced, sustainable, and resilient world without coming into conflict. While political hierarchy is not required for most forms of human interaction, It can emerge naturally at times, especially in the conversation about how to manage finite resources on the finite planet. So sometimes we get into this conversation. I don't think it's this room that's part of the conversation, but people can get into this idea that hierarchy is always bad. And that's probably not the truth of it. There are hierarchies in nature. Hierarchies exist. But, and when it comes to the finite resources on a finite planet, we do all have to live here together. And there is going to be some need to recognize the ability to govern at various levels. And I think that's one of the trickiest topics when we get into personal empowerment, personal sovereignty, and empowering individuals and empowering communities. When we talk about that on a global scale, and you can't quite see everything that your community is doing to affect the whole, it can be a touchy conversation. And it's the one time we have to really dance with how we can accept a political body of hierarchy. Yeah. Beautiful. CoGov empowers the existence of organically formed regional bodies to facilitate communication and interoperability to manage finite networks. Rapid iteration. A massive shift in human consciousness is upon us. So we need to exponentially increase our ability to coordinate at scale to allow for the rapid emergence and to mitigate existential risk. So, yeah, global warming is something that it's kind of like a red herring. Like there's something happening, right? A lot of people, some people think they know exactly what's happening. Other people have questions, but that's just one of the things that are happening. There's lots of things happening. A lot of you guys know Daniel Schmattenberger and Forrest, and I spent some time talking with Forrest Landry, and he told me that by their analysis, they're working with a lot of the big government people on existential risk. And he told me that global warming is actually 7th on the list that they're actually addressing. And so the problem we're facing with these kind of topics is not what is or isn't happening. It's that we can't create coherence around what is or isn't happening. We cannot create agreement, and therefore we can't create collective action. And so that's the critical thing to understand. What I'm trying to say is that unless we have social systems that we can trust, we're not going to solve any of these problems. And if we don't allow for the rapid emergence of new social systems to happen now, we might be in trouble. So the old paradigm has the advantage of an economy of scale. So a new approach will require the ability to create scale efficiencies or it won't be attractive. Again, I've kind of hit on that point a couple of times. People get to not just participate in the systems, but they get to participate in the design of those systems and the redesign of them and the tweak and the design of use until those systems over and over until we get it right. If there is ever a right, it's probably an endless evolutionary process. Maximum resilience. This is the critical piece of what Holochain does, and it's surprising that we are just showing this now. But we can see the difference in just from a visual aspect of what the technology looks like. In a centralized network, you look at something like Facebook, right? So all of the nodes have to connect to the central server. If you want to send a chat to your friend, you have to go through Facebook's central server in order for that message to resend. If you want to transact money in this world in some way, you're dealing with a central bank to do that. The word central is even in there. They are the controllers of the money. They create the money. All your interactions go through that central entity. Or you could take money and you could say there's a lot of central banks, right? That's decentralized. That's a little better. At least there's not one, in theory, at least there's not one bank that controls the whole entire world. There's a whole bunch of banks. At least that's decentralized. That's one step in the right direction. And then you have distributed. So distributed is the fully sovereign approach to where each individual gets to choose how they want to interact voluntarily. And from that agreement and choice, we can have interactions happen. That is the most resilient. If a central bank collapses, if a federal government collapses, we have a lot of chaos that ensues. And who knows what's going to fill the vacuum from the loss of that central entity. But if we're all we're all in the habit of, and all understand our world in such a way that we are operating from a sovereign place and making with the utmost choice in each of our daily decisions, operating from that place of the highest good for our personal stake and the highest good for what works for all, we are resilient because we can change our mind. I'll get into a little bit of the definitions and concepts here. Again, currency. Let's change the way we think about currency. Not necessarily just money. This is the fundamental thing that came out of the meta-currency project X number of years ago. Let's see the current and the flow of exchange that's happening. And let's use digital tools to help us make more intelligent decisions about those flows as we identify them. So in CoGov, I'm proposing that there are essentially 3 categories of currency and a catch-all. And the 3 categories are influence, equity, and impact. So as a group, when you create a membrane, you have a mission, a vision, you come together, you have shared assets, you're stewarding over assets, you understand your levels of influence is one of the things that get identified. And that influence can flow, of course. One of the things that happens that seems to go wrong in it, whether it's an activist organization or a startup company or even a government or a community, is that somebody will be channeling a spiritually powerful message, rise to recognition and power within a community. And they are called at that point, coherence holder, or Eric has a few other good terms, source point, right? So there's a source point that comes in and they're just channeling clear. They're bringing something good and strong, and everybody realizes it, everybody senses a goodness, and people get on board with that. That's great. But what can happen is that their stuckness can come from that, and the ego attachment to a leadership position or a title or a control over an asset can happen, and everything starts going wrong from that point. Corruption starts happening. Less transparency starts happening. So influence should flow. Influence should flow from a source point, and that source point comes in, does their job. Another source point arises that they're channeling something clear, and that's resonating with the group, resonating with how to steward an asset. Let the influence flow, and let's bring transparency to how that influence is flowing. So influence, ebbing and flowing, is just another currency. Equity is a pretty familiar concept to most of us, I think. It's like a share of stock in a company. So it's an actual piece of an ownership of an asset, a physical asset in the real world. So an equity currency would represent your personal holding in a physical asset, a portion of it. Impact currency is the idea that while all the other currencies are created within a group themselves or agreed upon by multiple groups, be identified as shared value. Impact currency is something that allows for a group to have visibility brought to them about things they might not necessarily be seeing from within their membrane. So a simple example is like a negative impact currency. So you have a factory producing widgets and they're polluting the stream. The factory may not really be paying much attention. That group of people stewarding the asset of the physical buildings, the physical machinery that's making the widgets, not paying attention to the stream they're polluting. Impact currency is the idea that the external community can create that currency and apply it to that factory, start making debits on that account somehow, and eventually, hopefully, lead to a place where conversation can be had. And the accounts can be balanced and the flow can all be naturally felt and the stream can be clean. Everything else that's not one of those 3 categories There are all kinds of things that we can recognize as groups for our various contributions and ways that we interact with each other, that we value between each other. I just, for lack of a better term right now, that's called fiat within CoGov. And that is, they're just as important, right? These are things that are meaningful to us as a group that are very possibly unique to our particular group. If you're in a co-stewarding a community home, and you have leaves getting in your gutters, so he has to go up and clean those leaves. It doesn't really actually make life any better. It just keeps life the same, right? So in that sense, the person who's willing to go do that should be recognized. That was a contribution of energy and time. So that's where a fiat currency, this catch-all fiat currency, could be assigned to something. We can see the flow and who in contributions, and all of the things that are meaningful to us. Like I used the example of hugs earlier. If our community really values hugs, and we wanted to know who's just the best hugger in the world, we could do that. We could create a currency to track that. To bring transparency to the hugs that are already happening anyway. Never try. And so this is straight out of the MetaCurrency project page. This is the life cycle of currencies. I thought this was important because currencies, the idea isn't that they always, they evolve. Our way of looking and valuing things evolves just like our valuing of the things themselves. So this life cycle allows, it goes from conception to design to build to launch, to adoption to management to feedback to evaluation to redesign, to rebuild, to relaunch, to adoption to management to feedback to evaluation. At some point in this cycle, the currency may have lived its usefulness. It's time to move on, time to evolve. We can wind down and close. A lot of other things I can talk about. All of these things are defined in the digital co-governance web paper that I kind of started all of this presentation. And so I won't go into too much of that right here. The status of the project, I'm working with a lot of, in conversations with a couple different groups on how to implement useful tools on top of CoGov. You see some of those organizations there. I'm sure some of you are familiar with some of those. Members of those organizations present in the room. There are actually a bunch of moving parts here with this whole implementation of CoGov in the real world. We're waiting on Holochain core, of course, and their beta release is imminent, and to the point where they're actually on an alpha release schedule, a weekly alpha release schedule. That's big news because not only releasing an alpha every week, but they're actually providing documentation with the alpha, which means that if your code breaks, you know how to fix it. That's big. Any developers in here? Thank God they're finally there. But really until Holochain is stabilized, we can't move this forward too much, and that is imminent. And then the CoGov mixin is not a big technical development. All of the things I'm proposing here, none of this is a big technical project on its own, just the CoGov layer itself, right? All the fun and all the work and all the magic comes when we go to actually build the tools that communities can use. So what we do have, that layer that needs to be built as soon as the release is there. And then, so it's the creation or conversion of backends, the Holochain governance app. So any kind of tool that you're using currently that involves your team in some way, it involves sharing information, collaborating, all those things could probably have aspects of what I talked about that they're actually operating within. And we could actually take what's great about the front end of those tools, rewrite the back end on top of Holochain and CoGov. So we have a fully interoperable, fully transparent operation system. And I've actually gone into the process. I'm actually enjoying the process of doing some of this on paper now, asking some of those questions. Like mainly, if we go back here, I'm enjoying working with groups that are in a startup kind of phase where there's a group of people coming together to really help identify their vision and their mission and get clear on some of the core, man, that's way back there. Went too far. I went to get really clear on some of the core principles that I'm putting forth. And And it's a really useful exercise. And I'd love to work with any of you on it. If any of this makes any sense to you and you want to kind of see it in action a little bit, I would love to work with you to do that. And we talk about things like, there we go, shared purpose and vision. Get clear on that. Get clear on the assets you're stewarding. Get clear on that. Get clear on the levels of influence that exist within the group and how we can fluctuate those. And get clear on the plans and agreements and the means of value exchange. So identifying these different types of currencies that you're going to be involved with and how that can apply to the greater ecosystem. Getting clear on all that stuff to me is just a magical process when you do it. We have questions? Yes.
At levels of influence in the group, that can be such a unnecessary thing.
It can be. Yeah.
Tell me what your experience is with how to map that out.
Well, the idea again is not to use the system, use any digital technology to force a way for influence to happen or shift. The idea is to see what's actually happening in the group and just use digital tools to help bring transparency to that.
So everybody like votes on what they think.
Well, I think it looks more like the goal is to probably create something like a meritocracy, right? Where those who have the wisdom and experience are the ones that have influence over a certain asset. And the goal is to be able to have that break down in smaller subgroups as needed, right? So as an organization is getting big, this isn't saying that, you know, any one central council has to, or any one person has to steward all of it, right? But that we can identify subgroups over certain assets where the knowledge and experience is best and place the influence of that person, right? Or that group. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
So if I follow you, the community itself decides collectively where that wisdom can exist and can apply that type of influence accordingly? Or?
Yeah, it's good to have an idea. I noticed that, you know, sometimes when you can get into conflict, if you haven't already had a means of identifying whose responsibility or whose coherence holding over the particular thing that's in conflict, your conflict gets 10 times more complicated, right? So if you have a transparent process that's ahead of time, that's really identifying the currency, identifying the influence currency flowing, and that the influence is going a certain direction, and it's time, if there's a conflict comes up, it's like there was a time for you to notice the influence going a certain way. That was the time to bring it up, not say you don't like the decisions that are getting made now. I think that's, yeah. Cool. Yeah, that is kind of the most of the formal presentation. Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, I'm doing this. I'm enjoying doing this on paper with people. There's ways to start building digital tools, and we can build interfaces now. That's the thing. So if any of this makes sense, and you can see how tools built on this infrastructure can benefit organizations, we can start building front ends for those tools now, while we're waiting for Holochain to get their act together to be released into the world. But that's something we can go full bore on. Like we can make them work. We can play with them. And I guess I also want to, reconnect the importance of how Junto and all the other Holochain apps that are coming forth in the field play into this. So we're using social network to share cute cat pictures and take pictures of our meals and to argue politics and all those things. But wolf pictures. And so but we're creating great networks of people. I love Facebook for the way it reconnects me and I get to keep in connection with so many people. And so how can we take the same tools that we enjoy so much in the collaboration and all those things that are happening and actually start doing things in the world, right? And so that's where this layer comes in. We can take it, we can build our social coherence with Junto and all the other tools, and we can start actually building groups together and making things happen.
Restructuring our networks that already
restructuring our networks and how we see them and how we organize.
Turn back on how they build on. That's it. Turn back
turn back a governance system?
Kind of, that's, you get like a why or do I figure it out?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And even, I mean, I even see this as being potentially the way that development groups, since it's all open source and open data in Holochain, and we can get into that situation, Eric was alluding to the governance piece of the development team itself, right? Because we don't want to get in a situation where we get somebody stuck on an ego attachment to a certain way an application is. This is actually not what the community wants, who's using the application. So this governance piece could actually work for development teams on Holochain. It's like some kind of paradoxical loop or something. Questions? I thought it's all, yeah.
You envision for this actually taking form that will be from startups or like different organizations, but then also in like regular families, parts of putting this in action. How do you see the vision?
Yeah. Yeah. So the question is how do I see it in groups and businesses and communities, governments? Actually at some point, I mean, if this is working, this is working for our businesses and working for our small projects. Why wouldn't it work for our township or our county or our state or our federal government or a global coherence building sense making system?
Start with HOA.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great application. Because I've never noticed more tension than that. And when around people who think they bought their home and they're independent, they're sovereign on their home, and this organization gets together, a group of homeowners, we're dealing with this in Crestone, where 60% of the state law that we found, 60% of the homeowners can get together and then start managing all of the home. 60%. And the 40% that didn't want anything to do with it, all of a sudden they're under management. I mean, how ridiculous is that? That's the best we can do right now? Really? So this clearly can create more coherence. Where are the things that 100% of the people can agree on? What are the things that we can work other ways to have everybody have what's best for them? Yeah.
Yeah, what I was going to say relates to that too, and the work that we're doing, but it takes leaders being in there, making sure that when you're trying to interconnect people with the system, who has influence when you're wanting to create systems that interconnect a system being built for elders, or the elders need to say, I have the influence over what I want to see my system built like. Here's my team, here's my one. Same with the youth community. So this allows you to have the right people in there making the right decisions and having the influence and having those votes, because it's a system being created for them to benefit them, and keeping systems like what you're talking about, where a group of leaders that isn't the majority of the people being affected, making some decisions that are just crazy for the rest of the people that are affected by it.
Right. When influence ends up in the hands that's not representative of the community as a whole, it needs to shift. I mean, it's got to be easy. That can't be a painful process. I mean, how just disempowering and painful is that to have that be a difficult process that we all go through in our daily lives? I think, great. I know I do. Yes.
Right now, our executive branch has guns.
Yes.
And if you don't pay taxes, there's a certain amount of influence and a certain amount of fear-based tied into, like, well, if I say no, my property line's here, and the HOA says you actually exist, it comes and escalates level where it's enforced at a level of intensity that might need to be addressed. I'm not sure if just done digitally. How's that supposed to
Yeah, this is a really important point. I wanted to get there, so thanks for bringing it up. So building coherence with these kind of principles can lead us to, in theory, really great places of everybody being heard, everybody feeling like they have a say, and everybody kind of feeling good, like they're getting what they want from their community, and sharing and giving enough too. Of course, giving to your community is what should cause the receiving to happen. But so if we're in that, we've created something there, and we're pure in that. But then we've got all these kind of other systems that aren't as pure. Now we are a choice as to how we want to interact with those systems. I think that's such a critical piece. So we're not just talking about sovereignty as an individual. We're talking about creating coherence with groups of people and various things that are meaningful to us. creating sovereignty as a group, recognize our individual and our group sovereignty, and then from a place of choice, deciding how we want to interact with other authorities. Right? We're not alone anymore. We've created agreements from integrity within our group and complete transparency. I think we're that much stronger. We're that much better able to coordinate to stand up against the things that aren't in integrity. Cool. That might just wrap it up, guys. Any other questions about any of it? Holochain, Junto, CoGov? They want to take the mic and share something? Okay. Thank you all for being here. I'm really honored.